So one of the biggest challenges that most of us face on a daily basis is how to be productive. It doesn't really matter what your job is or what your lifestyle is like. Nowadays, there is so much stuff going on that it's super difficult to not be pulled into a chaotic whirlwind of tasks, projects, demands, to-do lists, unforeseen events. And then you reach the end of your day or your week and you're absolutely knackered, but it feels like you've accomplished very little. Hey, we've all been there, and I think this is rapidly becoming one of the biggest modern day challenges that we face. How to get stuff done, but to do it in a way where it feels like we're actually making meaningful progress in our lives. It's tough, there's no doubt about it, but fear ye not, because in this episode we're going to fix all of that, or at the very least I want to help you start to sort out the mess that is your life. I'm exaggerating, of course, I'm sure your life is not a mess, but I do want to help you be a lot more productive by sharing the 5 best productivity tips that I know. I use these tips regularly to help me manage 2 businesses, while at the same time doing some voluntary work and also having a lifestyle that involves more than just hard graft. So I'm not saying I have everything worked out, far from it, but I promise that these tips will make an incredible difference to how you live your life. So are you ready? Let's get started. Hey there and welcome to the Stress Less Living podcast. My name is Stephen Burns and I've been a practicing coach, trainer and hypnotherapist for 25 years. Each week I'll share easily digestible bite-sized ideas that you can immediately put into practice so that you can live a more harmonious and balanced life. Because life is challenging, but whatever we encounter, we always have a choice. We can take the easy routes or the hard routes, the low stress way or the high stress way. Well, the Stress Less Living podcast is about always looking for the easy routes in life, the low stress ways to accomplish your goals, get more of what you want, and ultimately live a happy and more effortless life. So if you're looking for the perfect antidote for the chaos of modern life, my friend, you are absolutely in the right place. So before we kick off, just a very quick reminder. So pretty soon I'm going to be running a free event, a free training in a private Facebook group. So it's going to be on meditation and mindfulness. And as a podcast listener, like I said, you can join that event for free. So I did say in previous episodes that it's going to start on the 18th of November. That is incorrect. It's actually going to start on the 25th, but I'm going to be sending out those free invitations pretty soon if you want to keep an eye out for them. So let's get started. Let's take a look at these 5 productivity tips. So tip number 1, productivity is not just about doing more in less time. So this for me was an absolute game changer. So when I started doing some research on productivity a number of years ago, I found that there were a lot of people giving advice on the subject, as there is with pretty much everything these days. So you could go on YouTube, search for productivity tips, and you'll come up with thousands of videos. You could go on Instagram or TikTok and there'll be tons of influencers sharing hacks that can help you double your output in a fraction of the time and all kinds of other outlandish claims. And the thing is, many of these videos will offer some good advice, no doubt about it. But having sat through a lot of these kinds of videos, I found that so often they completely miss a crucial point and they come at the whole subject from the wrong angle. That they often work from the premise that productivity is all about getting more done in less time. And I want to suggest to you that that is not true. And actually believing that and having it as your main focus will likely make you less productive in the long run, and it will most definitely add unnecessary stress to your life. Because let's be honest here, if your goal for improving productivity was to simply just get more done in less time, what do you think you would do with all that extra time? Now, I'm not a betting man, but I would be willing to wager that you would just fill that space up with more stuff, more tasks, bigger to-do lists, more ambitious demands on your time. You'd just raise your set point. And that's then going to add even more pressure and additional stress in your life that's not really necessary. And a lot of the time, these tasks that we just add to be busy, they don't really move the needle forward in the main areas of our life. We're just doing them to fill time just to be busy. I mean, if you take your working life, for example, say you all of a sudden managed to get your day's work done in half the time. You were all finished and job done by lunchtime. So you go to your boss and say, "Hey boss, you won't believe it, I've managed to finish all my work and it's only 12:30. Do you think in this hypothetical scenario that your boss would turn round to you and say, "Congratulations, take the rest of the day off"? No, they wouldn't. They would just give you an extra list of stuff because they don't want you sitting about being bone idle. They're paying you by the clock after all. So there's a great example of this in the excellent book Free to Focus by Michael Hyatt. So I'll include a link to this book in the show notes. So he talks about an episode from the TV show I Love Lucy. So I Love Lucy was a show that aired in the 60s and 70s. And what happened is, in this episode, the main characters, Lucy and Ethel, get hired at a chocolate making factory. And their job is to wrap truffles. So it's like a kind of old style assembly line form of work. So on the first day, the manager, who is pretty old school, walks up to them and says, "If you fail to wrap even one of these chocolates, then you're both fired." So the assembly line starts and it's going so fast that they just simply can't keep up. So they panic and start eating all the chocolates to cover up how slow they are. Then about 10 minutes later, the manager arrives to inspect their work, and she can't see that they have about 10 chocolates stuffed in their mouth. So she thinks they're doing an amazing job because it looks like they're not just keeping up, it looks like they're ahead of schedule. So what does she do? She turns to the conveyor belt operator and shouts, "Speed it up." And I think this is a great analogy for modern life, especially in our working life. The more time we free up, the more we tend to try to fill it up. And often what we fill it up with is not really serving us. And also it leads to additional stress and potentially even burnout. So if productivity isn't just about doing more in less time, what is it? Well, I want to encourage you to see productivity as the ability to spend time on the things that really matter to you. It's about freeing up your life so that you can focus, concentrate, and get high quality work done in a way that fits neatly with your most important goals and values. When you view productivity in this way, it radically shifts your focus. You no longer task yourself until you collapse on the couch in a heap of exhaustion. You no longer spend time on the things that don't really move the needle forward for you, and you start to identify the things that matter most. The things that give you the greatest amount of joy and satisfaction. And you spend time on these places as much as you possibly can. You're doing things that will actually move your life forward in the most meaningful way. So that's tip number one. It's all about redefining how you look at productivity. It's not just about doing more in less time. It's about freeing up your life so that you can focus on what really matters to you. Tip number two, figure out your key goals, what's really going to move the needle forward for you and why they are important. So this follows on from the first tip. As I said, productivity isn't just about cramming more things in. It's about doing what matters to you. So it makes sense that one of the first things you want to do is to figure out what matters to you. That one of the big mistakes people often make is they start off by writing a to-do list. And that's okay, but it can sometimes end up looking like a total chaotic mess with hundreds of things crammed into the one list, arrows pointing in lots of different directions. Honestly, you should see some of my to-do lists from a few years ago. They are complete chaos. That when we lead with a to-do list like this, there's a tendency to try to cram everything onto the list. It just gets super cluttered. You can actually be stressed out just looking at it, and we can end up doing things that most likely aren't that important in the first place. If your to-do list is enough to give you heart palpitations like some of mine were back in the day, then you might want to reconsider that. So before you do a to-do list, you want to first figure out what your key goals are and why they're important. And you want to then use those to inform that list. So a question I like to ask is this one here. What are the key things that I need to move forward here? Or what are the most important goals that I need to progress? What would really move the needle forward for me? These questions just cut through all of the chaos, all of the masses of stuff that we think we have to get done, but aren't really that important, and start to laser in on the things that are going to move your life forward in the most impactful and meaningful way. It just cuts through all of the crap. So I like to ask these questions across multiple different time frames as well. So I like to be aware of the key things or areas I want to move forward over a yearly basis, more long term. I also then like to backtrack and do this on a monthly basis. What are the key things I need to move forward over this current month? And also on a weekly basis too. What are the key things I need to move forward this week? And also do that daily as well. And this prevents me from being distracted by shiny new objects, only to realise a few months down the line that I'm massively off track. So once you've done that, I find it's also useful to ask, why are these things important? And the reason you ask why is because it's a great test. Goals, directions, and plans with strong whys are goals that matter to you. And if the goal doesn't have a strong why, if it fails that test, then there's a good chance it's most likely not one of your primary concerns. You're perhaps better off focusing on something else. So once you've asked those questions, that's when you do your to-do list. You don't do your to-do list first, you ask those questions before you even get to that stage. And you then allow your key goals to inform that list. So you want to then have a think, what activities, what actions, what things do I need to do in order to move these key goals forward? That's the correct order to do it in. Rather than just frantically scribbling down a massive to-do list on a Monday morning, spend some time reflecting on what your key goals are and why, and then use that reflection to inform your list. So when I'm doing this on a weekly basis, I like to do this on a Sunday, and that just helps me laser in on the most important things I need to focus on for the coming week. So that's tip number 2, figure out your key goals and why they're important. Tip 3, practice single tasking. So this is something I talk about a lot in previous podcast episodes, but it's worth re-emphasizing because it is so important. And that's where you focus all of your attention on what you're doing in that moment. And then when you're finished, you then move on to the next task and you focus all of your attention on that. So personally, I'm quite fortunate now that my business is set up in a way that gives me lots of time to spend on research and content creation, which is what I love doing, but it wasn't always like that. I used to have a real job where I worked 12-hour shifts. I had 2 businesses at the same time. I was all over the place. My life was so chaotic. I'm getting exhausted just thinking about it. But I used to try to multitask. But then I realised that multitasking isn't just not effective. It actually isn't a thing. Our brains simply can't do it. That when we attempt to multitask, we just end up doing lots of single things really badly. That we can only ever really focus on one thing at a time, properly anyway. So instead of trying to multitask and doing a substandard job in each of the things, you want to commit to single tasking. Give each of the items on your to-do list or whatever it is that you're doing your full undivided attention. So what I like to do is I'll create a schedule. So I'll do a plan for the week. Like I said, I'll spend a little bit of time on Sunday, not too much time, just going over my key aims, the things that are really going to move the needle forward. And I'll use those key aims to inform my weekly list. And then once I have that schedule, I then do my best to give each item my full undivided attention when the week starts. And then once I've finished that thing, I'll then move on to the next. And this is quite difficult at first, I do appreciate that, but it is like a muscle. The more that you do it, the easier it becomes. But when you do that, you will not believe just how much the quality of your work will improve. Also, your concentration will get better over time. And you'll enjoy life more too, because so much of the joy and pleasure of life comes when we're fully connected with our experience. So it's kind of like a mindfulness exercise, but we're coming at it from a slightly different angle. So commit to single tasking, switch off your phones, there's time for that later, but make sure you give each thing on your lists your undivided attention. Are you someone who struggles with work-life balance? You find it difficult to maintain harmony between career ambitions and your personal well-being. You're doing your best to balance demands and deadlines with the other important aspects of your life, but things like burnout, stress, and a nagging sense of guilt seem to forever lurk in the background. Well, one of the best first steps that you can do to create more balance is to do a full life audit. This is a powerful process that helps you highlight areas of your life that are a little bit out of sync that potentially need addressing so that you can be more in harmony. So if you want to do a life audit, then I have a free PDF that will take you through the entire thing. To get access to that, please check the show notes. You'll see a link and all the information you need. Also, as a bit of an aside, if you have been diagnosed with ADHD, then all of what we've been talking about so far is going to likely be even more important to you. Now, I'm not ADHD personally, so I'm not speaking from experience, but I do have lots of friends and students, and for a while there, most of my clients had been diagnosed with ADHD. And what they say is that the difficulty they have is knowing what to focus on, that they can single task. In fact, they can often experience hyper-focus in certain areas, but they can end up just getting pulled in a direction that really takes them off track. They can end up disappearing down a rabbit hole, and before they know it, they've lost hours, potentially days, and it's not really been taking them in the direction they want to go in. So I think identifying the key goals and then single tasking with each of the items that serve those goals can be super powerful for everyone, but I think it's going to be even more valuable if you've got quite a bit of ADHD going on. So that's tip number 3. Tip number 4, practice self-automation. So again, I learned this from the book Free to Focus by Michael Hyatt. So when we talk about things like automation, we're normally talking about outsourcing tasks to technology. So things like email responders, calendars, stuff like that. And all of those things are amazing. They're great. But there is also something called self-automation. So this is where you look to create habitual behaviors and you put in place systems that move your key goals forwards. Because the thing is, the beauty of habits is that once they're in place, they happen automatically. We just do them without thinking. So they require a lot less energy. We don't have to use our brain power to work things out. We just do it automatically. So this is a much more efficient way to work. It also creates consistency. It allows us to get the job done even when we're having a bad day, because we just go into autopilot and our subconscious just does it for us. But crucially, it frees up our attention and energy so we can then use that mental space to focus on other things that are important, like maybe family or recreation or hobbies or something else. So many people are like spent forces by the end of their working day. And even though they want to do more stuff, they want to take up new hobbies or go visit friends, they just don't feel like they can because they don't have the energy. Work has drained them and tired them out so much. So when you self-automate, you'll get your work done more efficiently, but crucially, it will give you more mental energy to focus on other areas of your life that are important. So what would be some examples of self-automation? Well, a classic example is a morning ritual. So this is where you have some kind of routine, something that you do ritualistically, a habit. So a good morning ritual should be bespoke, but for me, it has to do 2 things. First of all, energize me, and second, create focus. So when I get up, I don't know about you, but I'm certainly not energized first thing. I'm pretty sleepy. So I get into the shower, and at the end, I'll turn the dial to cold for around about 30 seconds. And this helps me get energized. Then I'll get some breakfast and I'll start to do something called a power pose. So this is where you stand in a body posture that's really powerful. So I'm not going to go into that in this episode, but if you want to check out the TED Talk called Power Poses by Amy Cuddy, then she talks a bit about the different types and how they can affect your neurology and how you feel. And then I'll just spend a few moments thinking about my key goals and just connect briefly with why I'm doing them in the first place. And because I've done this ritual so many times, then it happens very, very quickly, and all of that energizes me and creates focus. But the key thing is that this is an example of self-automation. I've done it so many times that I can do it without thinking. I just do it automatically, and it takes me in a good place, and this then carries over into the day. It has a positive ripple effect. And if I don't do that, then I end up just, trudging into the day, and I'm just nowhere near as efficient. So that's an example of self-automation, where you create positive habits and systems that help you accomplish your goals. Anytime you create something that you can repeat and do ritualistically, automatically, without thinking, that gets you results and moves the needle forward for you, it's going to help you free up energy and mental focus. It will make you more efficient and it'll help create consistency without burnout too. So have a think, for you, what positive habits and systems do you need to put in place that fit in with your key goals that are going to help you move the needle forward in the key areas of your life? So that's the fourth tip, and the fifth and final one is practice process automation. So I don't know about you, but my memory isn't always the best. Sorry, what were we talking about again? I'm prone to the odd senior moment every now and again. I don't know what your memory is like, but irrespective, we all have to have a way to recall how we did important tasks previously. If we don't, then it can be easy to forget, and it can sometimes feel like we're having to start from scratch all the time. And this is totally inefficient. So the solution to this is to do something called process automation. Sounds very sexy, doesn't it? So process automation is where you document how you do the tasks that you do. So this is especially good with tasks that we have to do that are important, but we maybe don't do them that frequently, so it's not enough for them to become an automatic habit. So if you're having to remind yourself of how to do these tasks each time you do them, then that's going to take up energy and it's going to waste a lot of time too. So if you document the process, how you actually did that task successfully, then it can help you do things quicker, more easily, and you'll do it much more efficiently too. So for example, every single face-to-face presentation that I've done over the years, I have a record of it in a folder in my MacBook. It's also backed up in the cloud as well. So it's basically an overview of what I talked about previously in that session, and there's some notes attached to each of them. Now, this sounds maybe a little bit obsessive, but honestly, I could not do without it, because if I have to do a presentation on a topic that I've not done for about a year, then I can just pull it up, tweak it, refresh it, and Bob's your uncle, we're good to go. And if I didn't do that, then I'd have to create the whole thing from scratch again, because I wouldn't be able to remember what I said. It would just take so much work. So that's process automation. Amazing technique for saving time and energy, and it also makes you massively more efficient. So another benefit of this is it also helps you avoid something called decision fatigue. I don't know if you've heard of that before. So this is the idea that making decisions tires us out. It gradually wears us down and depletes our mental energy reserves. And it's not actually the big decisions that tire us out either. It's the countless micro decisions that we make every single day. So we're talking about every email that you send, every time you decide what you want for lunch or for dinner, or what to wear for work, every question that you respond to. These are all micro decisions. And by sheer numbers alone, they eventually wear us down and deplete our mental energy. And that's why you can come home from work and while physically you've not actually done much, you've been sitting at a desk all day, but you're utterly exhausted mentally. It's because you've been making all of these micro decisions and eventually they've all built up. Well, process automation and also self-automation that we talked about in tip number 4 massively reduces the number of decisions we have to make because you've either habitualized certain behaviors so that you can get results more automatically, or you've documented processes so you don't have to remind yourself, you don't have to analyze and think and make decisions about what you're going to do. It's all there and you can do it very quickly and efficiently. So there we have it, 5 top tips for boosting your productivity. There are some honourable mentions that I'll likely talk about in future episodes. First of all, delegation. For many people, that is a dirty word. They have an allergic reaction to delegating. And if that's you, then I feel you. That is also a massive challenge for me. Often people don't delegate because they think that they don't have anyone to delegate to, or no one else can do the job as good as them, or it's quicker to just do the job themselves, or it just takes too much time to delegate, so why bother? Well, all of these are myths, but like I said, I'll probably do an entire episode on this, because that is quite a big topic, and I think it's a useful thing to dig into in a future episode. Also, a second honourable mention is rest. It's not the sexiest productivity tip on the planet, but you need rest. Rest is not something that we should only do to recover from exhaustion when we're a complete spent force. It's an essential productivity tool. When we get the right amount of rest, we feel fresh, alert, our output increases, we're much more efficient, we can think more clearly, and in general, we just enjoy life more. So you don't want to be burning the candle at both ends, get enough rest. So that is us for this episode. Let's do a quick review. So tip number 1, shift how you view productivity. It's not just about doing more, it's about spending time on the things that matter to you. Tip number 2, figure out your key goals. What are the most important areas that you would like to progress in your life and why? And then use those things to inform your to-do list so you're not just doing random stuff to make yourself feel busy. Tip number 3, practice single tasking. Move away from attempting to juggle lots of things at the one time and give each thing on your list your undivided attention. Doesn't mean you only do one thing in your day, you can do lots of things, but each time you do something, you want to become immersed in it. Give it your full attention. Tip number 4, practice self-automation. You want to create some positive habits and systems that you can rely on to get results. And tip number 5, practice process automation. Don't try to reinvent the wheel every time you do something. Spend some time documenting how you get results, especially with things that are important to you, but you maybe don't do that often so they don't become habits. And I think if there's one takeaway I'd like you to get from this episode, it would be that first tip. Redefine how you look at productivity. Stop seeing it as just about doing more, it's about doing what matters to you. Such a key distinction. Now, as a byproduct, you will probably start to free up time because you're increasing your output and you will be more efficient, but you don't want to have doing more as your primary focus. If you do, you'll just end up filling your time with extra stuff, and that will inevitably lead to more stress, higher demands, and potentially burnout. Plus, as I mentioned earlier on, often the extra stuff we cram in isn't that useful. We're just doing it to be busy or to justify our time. So instead, you want to use that extra time to either rest, enjoy some downtime, or spend time on other areas of your life that are important to you, ones that give you joy, pleasure, and satisfaction. Because ultimately, how you spend your time is one of the most important things to focus on. In fact, there's a famous study that was done on happiness in the 1960s. So it was by psychologist Angus Campbell of the University of Michigan. So he wanted to figure out what makes people happy. And he found that one of the most powerful common denominators of happiness was actually quite simple. That the happiest people in general were those who believed that they were in control of their life, and in particular, in control of their time. That they had organised their life so that they could spend their time on the things that mattered, the things that were meaningful and most important to them. So I want to suggest that there is a lot more at stake here. Productivity isn't just about maximising output, it's ultimately about your happiness. And I don't think there's anything more important than that. So thank you once again for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you could follow me or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're feeling especially generous, it would be amazing if you could leave a review. It really does help. So thank you once again for listening, and I'll speak to you next week.